What a proud moment for every Indian out there who sees that national flag unfurl. And what a proud and a joyous moment that really is. India is indeed celebrating 70 years of independence, and after he unfurled the national flag at Delhi's spectacular Red Fort, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said it is our duty to make India the very best. The focus really needs to be to take India from Swarajya to Surajya. So what does the nation make of the Prime Minister's historic Independence Day address? Joining me right here on ET Now are five of the finest minds I know who are going to talk on that matter. Rajiv, Chandrashekhar, Sunil, Kant, Munjal, Gurcharan, Rajiv Kumar and Dileep Padgaonkar. Thanks each one of you for sparing time and being with us right here on ET Now as we discuss and understand the Prime Minister's Independence Day speech, his address to the nation, and what should an India, a proud India, really be making out all of that. Dileep Padgaonkar, let me begin with you. We've heard the Prime Minister twice before from the ramparts of Red Fort making those historic speeches. This speech was long on detail, but I'm going to ask you the big question. Is there a departure that you sense from his previous two speeches? Those were grandiose, where he announced things like Make in India, Stand Up, Start Up India. This was long on detail. This was a lot about execution. This was implementation. Do you believe there is a departure in that sort? From the grand statements, he's coming down to implementation. He's coming down to the nitty-gritties of governance. He's talking about not just Karya, but Karya Shaili to begin with.
Well, certainly there has been a departure in a couple of respects. You see, there is first and foremost in the earlier two speeches, there was a constant refrain on what previous governments had not been able to achieve and what his government will be achieving during his term in office. I found the speech a bit too long. I found it occasionally rambling. In places it was disjointed. But I think overall, despite the air of self-congratulations, I think he did lay down emphasis on what he kept on saying, the last mile deliverables. And I think this accent on implementation of policies is certainly welcome. We'll talk a little later about some of the surprises in his speech. But overall, I thought he had a lot of ground to cover. He had to address all kinds of constituencies. And it's obvious that he's taken inputs from a large number of sources for his speech. But overall, I would say, yes, the departure is that he's moved away from making grand announcements to going into the nitty-gritty of implementing the ongoing projects and, in fact, even initiating some new ones.
All right, initiating some new ones, moving away from grandiose. A little too long is the word from Dileep Padgaonkar. Gurcharan, is this transition only natural? He is now a Prime Minister for over 2.5 years. He's talking about, and he's seeming a man in execution. He no longer perhaps wants to make those visionary statements like a new man in office would, which is why he chose the platform for the last 2 years. Do you believe this seems like a Prime Minister more in execution mode?
Well, the purpose of an Independence Day speech, first, is to inspire people. And he did a good job of that. The second job really is a kind of scorecard. We don't want to hear in this speech announcements, like budgetary type announcements. What we want to hear is how we are doing, because it comes midway between the budget, and so the focus on implementation, I think, was dead right. I wish, though, he had sold some of his programs even better. He's a good salesman of ideas, far better than a lot of his predecessors. And the country still finds it difficult to do reforms, and we keep reforming by stealth, and this is every opportunity one gets, one should do that. And I wish that GST is a big deal that's happened, and of course it's the first step, but it's on the way. And the GST plus other the things he talked about, the national agricultural market and so on, these are all opportunities to tell people that the competitive market is good for all, so that how it reduces costs, how GST will reduce costs, how it improves the quality of people's lives, the poorest persons life, that it doesn't make the rich richer and the poor poorer. That's what the ordinary person still believes in our country. So, and when it comes to the scorecard, you know, he was elected for three reasons. He was elected to control inflation, so he gave a scorecard on inflation. And I think the government has done a good job. Second, he was elected to stop corruption. And I think this government has done a good job on the second front. Third was jobs. Now, we haven't seen those jobs coming yet. And I wish he had devoted more time.
I have individual questions on all of those points, and I am going to come down and break it all up as we get it back. Quickly, I want to get in a word from Rajiv Chandrashekhar. Some of the points that you raised, we have specific questions on that I will discuss with you. Rajiv Chandrashekhar, the question is coming your way. Do you believe the speech is a tad too long on detail and short on inspiration? This is not your typical Prime Minister Modi from the ramparts of Red Fort.
No, I think what he's, no, I'll tell you, Supriya, I personally find this speech much more satisfying than any grand vision speech, because I think the problems that we are facing as a nation really need specific, clear-headed solutions. You know, for 70 years, we've heard inspirational speeches from the Red Fort, from many, many prime ministers. And what we really needed to hear from a prime minister is what is his overall architecture, what are his government's objectives. And I think he's laid out a reasonable framework of what his government's objectives, goals, and intentions are. And so I know it's a departure from the high-winded visionary speeches of the past, but I think it's time that we started focusing as a nation on the specific problems that we face and the solutions for them. And I think he's moving the narrative to governance, he's moving the narrative to good governance, transparency, things that are so critical for us as people in a democracy. And so I'm quite pleased with it.
Mr. Sunil Kant Munjal, the last two times we heard the Prime Minister from the Red Fort was when he made those famous blitzkrieg publicity, publicity slogans like a Make in India, Stand Up, Start Up India. This was a departure, and everybody concedes there indeed was. But do you believe he's gone out there and addressed all the constituents that were waiting to hear him on an Independence Day? He's taken on Pakistan, he's spoken about caste, he's of course spoken about Indian industry, he's spoken about economy, he's spoken about inflation. Has he addressed all the constituents? The point that I think Mr. Padgaonkar and both Mr. Gurcharan made earlier, that he's taken inputs from all constituents and tried to address them. Do you essentially agree with that?
So it was a very wide spectrum that he covered in his speech. And by the way, there will never be a perfect speech. If it was short, you would ask, why is it too short? If it was no detail, you would ask, why there's no detail? So I think it was a pretty intelligently designed speech. Because don't forget, many of us have been saying now that the amount of work this government has done, there is not enough communication within India of what is going on. So I'm glad he took this opportunity to explain some of it. I actually think he could have done a little bit more on explaining some of the government plans and how they are being implemented. I like the idea of his talking about governance. I like the idea of his talking about how they're going to reach out to people and all their programs will start from the most disadvantaged first. So I think you're right that he has tried to address various constituents and he's done a reasonably good job. Could he have done more? There's always potential for more. But I think considering that this is an hour and a half long speech, I think he did a pretty good job.
All right, pretty good job, and you can always criticize the Prime Minister for either speaking too little or speaking too much. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, this question is coming your way, and I'm getting down to specifics right now, because I think from our point of view, the fact that the Prime Minister chose this platform to speak about inflation, to speak about RBI, to speak about that 4% plus minus 2% target is indeed important. But my question to you is more about the political reasons to do so. Do you believe at one level it is now emphatically certain that the Prime Minister has made it clear that, and given of course the political constraints around it, that despite all the talk that has happened on growth in the last 2 years, the focus of his government is going to be to rein in prices, because there's a political price to pay if they aren't reined in? Dr. Rajiv Kumar.
Supriya, I think the speech for me was very important in the Prime Minister telling the nation that he is walking the talk that he has made in the last 2 years. And I think therefore the focus on implementation, therefore the focus on what he called the Niti, Niyat and Nirman was actually very important, and he did a very good job of it. What he's done very well, I think, is to say that he will focus on specifics, and therefore he defined a lot of them. But I think his commitment on creating the development state, that he will focus on good governance, and he then spelled out what that good governance was about accountability and implementation and execution, etc. I think it was the key there. But the two other things that I must say were very the highlights to me is that he has made it clear that he will not ever cede the ground on inclusion and the welfare of the common person to anybody, and he will make the reforms work for them, which I think is very good, because reforms are seen to be pro-rich, and therefore the focus on inflation is very welcome. And finally, I think I like the fact that he said that economics is not enough, and that we have to focus on social, on social cohesion, on social understanding, on social justice. I think that particular issue, that particular part of his speech was to me very important, because very often we dodge that question. He took that straight on, and I think that the insistence that economics has to go hand in hand with social, with social justice and social, and social reforms, I think reflects him being a political leader as well as a social reformer. So I was very satisfied with the speech, both in terms of what he covered and also in terms of the specifics that he has made out to be, the sort of aligned to good governance, inclusion, and creating the development state in India, because that's been the lag. The whole deficit has been the governance deficit, and he has made it clear that he is now going to, provide, all the means to cover the deficit. And I think, therefore, we are looking at much more development and progress going forward.
Fair point indeed, but I want to get in the other Rajiv on the show, and Rajiv Chandrashekhar, the point that Dr. Rajiv Kumar made, that reforms are seen as pro-rich, and which is why his touching upon inflation at a platform like this is crucial. Do you believe at one level the speech was more directed to the common man, the man on the street, really?
No, I think, I would argue a different point. I would say that this is essentially speaking to every Indian, and there are many Indians who are very different types of stakeholders in our democracy and in our economy and in our government. There's a common man, there is the person who is still kept out of the overall story of progress. Then there is the overall investor group that is looking at the economy. So he is basically speaking to all of them in terms of what each one is seeking in terms of an answer, clarification from the government. So he's talking, for example, Kashmir is a legitimate issue to discuss, because law and order, security, cross-border terrorism are clearly issues that impact not just the security and intelligence forces, but they impact common man, they impact the economy, they impact the investor. So he's laid out essentially the plethora of challenges facing the nation, including the core challenge of good governance, the core challenge of keeping the common man at the center of public policy and government policy. And he's described it. Now, it may not be Shakespearean, it may not be meeting the Stephenites debating, standards, but that is exactly what I think now the government of India needs to be doing, speaking specifically to people about the specific concerns that they have and the solutions that the government has framed for them.
Sunil Munjal, I want to bring this to you. Mr. Das, I know you want to make a point in there, and I'm coming to you just next. But Sunil Munjal, the fact that the Prime Minister chose to name the RBI, he could have well said that my government has set this target of 4% and we've been able to rein in inflation and all of that. But the fact that he chose to name the RBI and said that the RBI will work on it and we will not give up on that 4% plus minus 2% inflation target, do you believe at one level he's taken the politics, or at least he's eased the pressure on the man who's going to do the job next? The whole interest rate scenario is just so politically, it's such a political hot potato. Do you believe he's kind of reduced the pressure on the man who's now going to occupy that hot seat in the RBI as far as interest rate monetary management is concerned?
For the day, maybe. But in the long term, it's a role both of monetary and fiscal policy. So I don't know if you can ever take it away completely. But explaining who is responsible, I think, is a good idea. On the economy, however, he actually covered a pretty wide spectrum, by the way. Whether he's talking about making income tax as an easier institution to deal with, or he's talking about India's economy growing to the third largest in 10 years, he actually covered a number of issues. So it was not only about inflation. I think he did a broad brush on India's economy and how the opportunities and jobs and economic opportunities will get thrown up if we are able to expand and rapidly grow this economy, which he said is our intent. In fact, he said this is the vehicle we have chosen for creating more opportunity, is to grow the economy. So I think that was it was a center of the job creation theme, because he picked a few themes as a part of the overall speech, and this one actually got covered from 4 or 5 different angles.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, economy was a big part and a big focus, and it was almost like he was presenting a report card to the people of India there. But Gurcharan Das, come in on that. The fact that he chose to name the RBI, the fact that he spoke specifically about that 4% plus minus 2% target, the fact that he said that we will do what it takes to rein in inflation and the RBI will also do so. Do you believe at one level, this is also the first signal of sorts that there is more consensus between North Bloc and RBI as far as monetary management, interest rate regime, inflation management is really concerned? There have been talks about differences in the past, and of course there's been a useless controversy in the recent past, but do you believe at one level he signaled that the government and the RBI are on the same page, inflation is enemy number one, and this is how the monetary management will help?
Yes, I think your presumption is right, that and I like that, because you know the Independence Day speech is partly an education for the people, and this is the point I was earlier making, and you picked it up when you said that the reforms are perceived as being pro-rich, and I'm so glad he used the word empowerment versus entitlement in his speech, because the big difference of this government versus the past government, the Congress governments, have been the focus on job creation, empowering people, and not giving them entitlements, not giving them doles, not giving them guarantees of, we'll give you this and we'll give you that, but we will try and create jobs, and jobs will give you dignity in life. And so all the Jan Dhan Yojana, the insurance schemes, crop insurance that he talked about, and all these are empowerment related, and they depend exactly on the success of the market and of creating jobs. So if there was one area where I was a bit disappointed, which I like the speech, I think it should be implementation oriented, but the one area was the route, that where are we on the route to creating the jobs? Because that's what's really on people's minds today, and that was what will decide whether he wins in 2019 or not.
Actually, that was going to be my next question as well, and I'm glad you've cued me to it. Dileep Padgaonkar, that question is really coming your way. The big theme that the Prime Minister spoke about is job creation. He did not just speak about it with an economic brush, he also spoke about it with a social brush when he said that the youth needs to be a part of mainstream economy, and that is how they will come back. He was essentially speaking about the political tensions of Kashmir. But my larger question is on job creation. He was elected to this house, and he was elected with that stunning majority on the development plank. The track record on job creation hasn't been as satisfying. Would you agree with us? And job creation is an area that he needs to cover a lot of ground on.
Yes, of course, I'd agree with that. But let me also take up something you'd mentioned earlier. I found this speech to be extraordinarily political, and I mean that in a non-pejorative way. I mean it in a positive way. Obviously, there were immediate electoral concerns because there are states going to the polls very soon. Let's not forget that the two specific references he made was one to Punjab and the other to UP. But it was also political in a larger context, and I think merits attention. He spoke of the need for social harmony, for social cohesion. He spoke about the essentially pluralistic nature of India. And of course, there might be some people who said that he ought to have been a little more forthright in condemning, for example, vigilante groups in the country, which he's done earlier before. But overall, I thought it was a very carefully scripted political speech. And while the economy did occupy a major portion of that speech, I think the underlying message is I've understood how the approach from Swarajya to Surajya has to be necessarily political, social and cultural in nature.
That's a fair point indeed, and I'm going to talk about politics in just a bit, but I know Mr. Munjal has to leave and I will direct the question on job creation to him. Inflation is one Achilles heel as far as this government is concerned, and job creation continues to be this albatross around every government's neck. India has grown, but what is growth worth without job creation? Do you believe at that level there is a red of sorts in this government's report card? The track record hasn't been as good as it could have been in the first 2.5 years, despite those grand schemes, despite Make in India, despite Startup India, the job creation. I mean, the unemployment levels in the country haven't really subsided. Mr. Munjal?
You're absolutely right. We have not created enough jobs. But I think we were fooling ourselves if we expected that schemes like Make in India would start throwing up jobs on day one. I think it's a wonderful, fantastic schemes for medium to long term, but it takes a while to get them implemented. So what we have done now, the last one I think will have the largest multiplier, which is the one to encourage entrepreneurship and startups. Because every time you create a job, you create one job. Every time you facilitate or help an entrepreneur, he or she will create 5, 10, 15 or 5,000 jobs. And that is what we need in India. So all of these put together, whether it's just sheer growth in the economy, and don't forget, we're actually coming through one of the toughest periods in the global economy. So I don't know how we were expecting to create millions of new jobs overnight. I think we are absolutely in the right path. This is the only option we actually have. I cannot imagine another workable option which will allow us to create the millions and millions of new jobs that we need in India. So all of them, Startup India, Make in India, so the Digital India, each one of them adds not just directly, but multiple facets of these activities will help creation of entrepreneurship and of jobs. I think we're absolutely in the right path. We have to stay this path. We must not walk off because we think jobs have not got created yet, because we did not have the entire environment ready for jobs to get created. I think it will still take us another year or two before we start seeing the results. But in the 5 to 10 year period, we will really truly see the benefit of all of these different programs, plans and schemes that have got implemented.
I do have a follow-up question for you on this, and I will direct that question to Dr. Rajiv Kumar as well. But Mr. Munjal, I want you to answer this question candidly. He spoke about stuck projects, and he chose his words rather carefully, and very strong words coming, and he said stuck projects are an act of criminal negligence. And obviously, once those stuck projects take off, there will be more investments, there will be job creation and all of that. Is this the kind of political thrust we needed, and do you believe, given that political thrust, is the enabling environment around those stuck projects being revived really there?
So the fact is absolutely correct. We have so many projects which are stuck at various stages, and what it has done is it's a vicious cycle. The banks which had lent to these projects don't feel comfortable lending to the same projects or even to new projects. Sometimes a wonderful new project comes in and the banks are humming and hawing and they're hesitant to go out and take the decision. Within government itself, in various departments, you saw people unwilling to take decisions where their name could get thrown up if something went wrong in the future. And I think this is something which we have to absolutely address as a nation together. We have to allow ourselves that there were some mistakes made, and therefore we need to do things to move on. Because if we don't, this is going to haunt us for a very, very long time. It's not going to allow us to develop this nation as we want. It is not going to allow infrastructure to get developed. And we do know one of our biggest hurdles today in India is physical infrastructure. and the governance system around these physical infrastructure, which is the operating systems, the O&Ms, all of this has got to be freed up. All of this has got to be resolved. This is one of our biggest hurdles, physical hurdles, for moving on with the economy at the pace that we would like. You know, GST has come in, but there are many other things to be done. You need still to work on, I'm sorry I'm taking on more than your question. We still have things like land reform, labor reform, criminal justice system reform. One of the least reformed areas which has changed over time is the judiciary and the police. I know this is not a fashionable area to speak about, but the amount of reform that is taken in other places is certainly not seen in these areas. Some reform, of course, has taken place.
Right.
But we need to ask ourselves, is it enough for the contemporary nation and going forward the kind of nation that we want to build?
No, I agree with your point. I mean, judicial reforms is something that we don't speak about very often, but what are reforms without the judicial reforms? Because that continues to be the big hurdle in some of these reforms being successful. I'll take a quick last question with Dr. Rajiv Kumar before I slip into a break and come back and discuss a lot more of the political statements that he made. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, my question to you is about those stuck projects. It's all right to give this political thrust from a platform like this, but the question that I put forward to Mr. Munjal, is there enabling environment? Are banks in a shape to now lend? Are corporates actually willing to take loans? I mean, that's the other big part. And, you know, is there enough decision making that's happening around these stuck projects? It's good to say it's an act of criminal negligence that those projects continue to be stuck, but is there political will really and empowerment at the bureaucratic level to get those projects off the ground? Dr. Kumar?
Well, I think there is. And thanks for coming my way. You know, I think there is enough monitoring, tracking, and bureaucratic coordination going on. Mr. Modi has started this, he mentioned this in his speech, the program called Pragati, where he sits down with chief secretaries and the secretaries of all the departments together once a month and monitors all these different projects and the progress on all the various schemes that he has announced. So I think, the fact that he knows these numbers of 270 stuck projects and 10.5 lakh crore being stuck there, and you know, and that he's, you know, sort of making sure that these are going forward, shows that he is on track to monitor them very regularly and very painstakingly, and I think that's just right. That's just the right thing to do. And I'm very pleased to have noticed that he didn't announce any new scheme except for that wonderful initiative of covering the medical expenses of up to 1 lakh for those people below the poverty line. Because I think that he was so right in saying that one illness and the family slips back into dire poverty and never gets out of it. So, but for that, I think it's just one other scheme, and that's all that he had announced this year. Because earlier, the Prime Minister's speeches on Independence Day were replete with innumerable new announcements and schemes and handouts and doles. None of that was here. His focus on the fact that each one of us has a duty towards creating the Swaraj and fighting for it and living for it, I think was very well taken. And finally, I think what his focus or his mention of the fact that India will have to live up to global standards, you know, to compete in the global economy, shows that he's not going to be waylaid by these people, you know, who profess protectionism and talk about, you know, Swadeshi, etc. And I think there is a message clearly to our own corporates that they have to measure up to global standards, and for that he's saying he will improve the business environment and the logistics and the infrastructure. So I think overall, right, you know, in that sense, he's got a balance between the global economy, India's role in it, and how to take India forward so that it can reach the goal that he's talked about of Ek Bharat and Shresth Bharat. I think that's a very apt summary of what he wants India to do and what he's committed to do.
You actually cued me. I thought I'm going to take a break, but you actually cued me to the next leg of this discussion. I will take a question very quickly to Rajiv Chandrashekhar. And Rajiv, you know, the fact that he just did not just snub the Swadeshi lobby by saying India needs to compete at global standards, he's also trying to caution his own men. There's a lot of chest thumping that's happening in New Delhi or parts of India about how we are the most shining spot, we are the sweet spot, we're the bright spot of the world. But he is cautioning his own people, his own colleagues out there, saying that we are aligned with the global economy and it's an uncertain globe or nasty neighborhood that we continue to live in. Rajiv Chandrashekhar.
No, absolutely, and I'm glad he said this. I'm particularly glad that he's sounding a note of caution, saying that, look, it's all very good to say we are growing high, but we need to understand what is going on globally. There is a significant, almost tectonic shift in the way the economic center of gravity is moving away from Western Europe to the US and China and to the Far East. And there is a need for us to understand that. For example, the Middle East, which has been traditionally an economy with a lot of as a source of capital, is also contracting, is also facing its own economic challenges. So the global economy is also going through a significant shift. And the Indian economy cannot remain this island of, delusion, saying that we are growing fast, and assume that that is a roadmap for a sustainable growth model. We have to have a decade of 10% plus growth to sort out our internal issues of poverty and deprivation. And to achieve that, we need to be more aligned and more aware and capitalizing the changes and shifts in the global economy.
Mr. Gurcharan Das, I do want to bring this to you, and before I take a quick breather and come back with the politics of it and throw a lot of questions to Dileep Padgaonkar there, but I do want to bring this to you for a quick word, that, there is a lot of chest thumping, and like Rajiv Chandrashekhar was pointing out there, as far as the realities of growth are concerned. Yes, we can raise our eyebrows and say we are not a one-eyed king in the land of the blind, but he is trying to caution people out there that, yes, we are growing, and we are perhaps one of the fastest growing countries and economies in the world, but please don't lose sight of the fact that we live in a very dangerous world, a world with very deep fault lines, and we may falter as well. Do you believe at one level there is a word of caution that's being thrown in, despite, of course, a lot of pride that was being created today? Mr. Gurcharan Das?
Yeah, I'm so glad that he did that he did put India's place in the world. And the fact of the matter is, in fact, if I were in his place, I would have gone a little bit further to educate the Indian people that our growth depends also on the growth of the world economy, and that openness, at a time when the global big players are turning protectionist, America, Europe, India has to be fighting for an open economy. And this is an unusual role for India, because India has always played a spoiler in international negotiations. And therefore, this is very important for this government to take the lead and become a champion of the open economy in the world, because we need the global markets at this point. If we, as Rajiv said, if we want to get up to 10%, and we must get up to 10% for a few decades if we want to really become a good, solid, high middle income economy. So therefore, I would say it's a message also to all the Swadeshi walas, all the old baggage of the bureaucracy, of protectionism, constant knee-jerk baggage in our corporate class, an entrepreneurial class, and India today needs the world economy the most, more than any other country, because this is our moment in history, and we want to be able to keep fighting for that idea. Well, so I'm glad he mentioned it. I wish he had gone further.
There is so much area that he could have gone further on, but let's take a quick breather, because I do want to come back and discuss the caste equations that he spoke about, the political compulsions, the big change in stance as far as Pakistan is concerned, and of course, the very uncomfortable, the Kashmir dialogue. We're going to come back in a moment and discuss all of that. Do stay tuned to us right here at TT Now. All right, welcome back. You're watching India at 70 and we are digressing now to the big statement that the Prime Minister made on social fabric of the country. And I'm going to begin this leg of the discussion with Dileep Padgaonkar. And Mr. Padgaonkar, you rightly pointed out that his speech was very political in nature. Political compulsions also did override the economy that he was talking about. But let's begin by talking to us about the social fabric. The fact that he said that the evolution has to happen even at an individual level. The fact that he referred to Punjab and UP is one part of the discussion, and those are political compulsions because our state assembly elections are there next. But the fact that he chose to speak about the caste equation, something that he did break his silence on just a few days back, but the fact that he decided to touch upon that on Independence Day from the Red Fort, are we reading too much into this, or was that cleverly thought out and he chose to do so?
Well, I think it was very, very carefully thought through because, you know, let's not forget that the BJP has now for quite some time been trying to be inclusive in its approach and doing its best to try and incorporate the Dalit section of the electorate in part into its own ambit. And if you see the kind of iconic stature that has now been given to Dr. Ambedkar, this again is something pretty new. This has not happened in the history of Hindu right-wing movements in the past. So after what happened to Dalits in various parts of the country, including in Una, in his own native Gujarat, I think the BJP has become extremely careful to make sure that this section of the citizenry doesn't get alienated from the BJP. So it was a very carefully thought out statement, I thought, and that went hand in hand with his extensive emphasis on social harmony, on the need for people to come together socially to fight social evils. All that, I think, is part of a very carefully thought out thing. Now, I appreciate that, I welcome that, because it is far, far removed from the kind of earlier speeches we heard from Mr. Modi while he was campaigning for the last general elections. He's turned very much now closer to the center in terms of his social ideas, and of course this stress again on pluralism. So as they say, the ones who have not understood the emphasis on pluralism, the emphasis on social cohesiveness, I think they are doing at their own peril. So that was also, in a sense, a very deeply political message. Secondly, equally politically, I thought, was the emphasis that he put on, and I think Gurcharan mentioned this, moving away from entitlement to empowerment. And there again, his priorities are absolutely correct. He emphasized on health, on sanitation, I think on youth, on women, and so on and so forth. Now, this is the kind of thing that will go down extremely well, because this portion of his agenda has been hijacked in the past year and a half by all kinds of fringe elements in the Sangh Parivar. And I think he's done well to bring the focus back to what is important, namely inclusive growth, inclusive development, and above all social harmony. I mean, these are the kind of messages that have been going around. One last point, which I thought was interesting. He paid tributes to those who helped gain India's freedom struggle, and apart from mentioning Mahatma Gandhi and Sardar Patel, he pointedly also referred to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. I am not very sure whether he'd done that earlier. I must check my facts, but I think this is welcome. Also, he paid tributes to previous governments who had also endeavored to do the kind of things that he'd spoken of, accepting that he felt that people's expectations had grown so much that they now want deliverables. They do not want any more promises. They don't
Mr.
want
Padgaonkar,
any more
I do
rhetoric.
want to touch upon that in a separate question. That was he more conciliatory today than he has been in the past? I want to touch upon that question, but I do want to take this to Rajiv Chandrashekhar. And Rajiv, my question to you is the question that I put forward to Mr. Padgaonkar. The statement that he made on caste, is this a message that he's delivering to his own? That please don't take the focus away from what I was really elected for? I mean, how do you read the statement today? That he's speaking about inclusion, he's speaking about, the caste bit from the Red Fort. Who is this message really meant for, is really the big question. Rajiv Chandrashekhar?
No, I think I'm again very pleased with that, because he got a mandate in 2014, Supriya. A mandate was governance Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. It was about governance, opportunity for all Indians, regardless of caste, creed, religion. And that was his slogan, that was his motto, that was what propelled him into government and power. And it was high time that he sent that message and reminded people again that that is his government's objective. That all of this, these things on the side that are happening about cows and, the Dalits, these are things that his government views as zero tolerance and no-go areas. So I think it was required for him to remind people what his mandate was, and in a sense remind also people in his government and in his larger political coalition that that is his objective, that he wants to deliver opportunity for all Indians at the bottom of the economic pyramid or wherever they are on the economic pyramid, regardless of where they come from and what their background is. And that was, I think, what required telling. And the last few days he has said some very strong statements on this account. And so this is a good repetition of that.
All right, he has delivered a message to his own that do not let my development agenda be hijacked by any other thing. But Dr. Rajiv Kumar, do you believe we are reading too much when some of us here believe, and Dileep Padgaonkar for once believes, and I think so to an extent do I, that he sounded far more conciliatory. He thanked everybody for the passage of the GST. He named Jawaharlal Nehru. He also spoke about continuity in policy. He said we've taken forward the agenda of the previous governments by improving it. Did he sound more conciliatory than he has been in the past?
Well, he started off his speech by saying that he does not believe in building the brand of a party or a political organization, but he's interested in building brand India. And I think that's where he's showing that he wants to rise above party politics and wants to now get included among, as it were, the statesmen, the leaders who will lead the country to newer heights. And therefore, I think it's not as much, it is of course conciliatory, but I think it's also most pragmatic, and also, I think appeals to the young people to say that, look, I'm not going to be bickering about petty things, and I'm not going to be naming names. He did not name once anybody from the opposition parties or other Congress, or even the Congress party. He rode above that. He chose to mention Nehru. Mind also the fact that he could have mentioned Shama Prasad Mukherjee and others from the BJP. He has chosen not to do so. And the fact that he has sort of said that, look, I am going to continue with the policies which are good policies and implement those which have been neglected and where the previous governments have been negligent about it. So my understanding of this is that there is this while writing about him, I sort of said there is this statement which says nation above party above self. And Mr. Modi is now living by that motto, which he must have learned as an adolescent in the RSS, because that's what the motto has been. I didn't know about it until recently, but that's what he's trying to do. And in doing so, he's trying to create a unity of purpose within this country and a trust between the people that, look, this government stands for the entire people and the entire nation and not for any particular segment. He also said, for example, very pointedly, that we must have respect for all religions. Now that's a strong statement, and I thank him for saying that, and I've been emphasizing that. So in this pluralistic, diverse country of ours, to create a consensus in going forward, this is what he needs to do. This is what he has done, and I think he needs to do much more of it, and much more often in his Mann Ki Baat and others, because we need that sentiment that we have to become non-partisan. We have to become pro-India to take India forward.
Right. I've got last 4 minutes on the show, and I do want to dedicate these last 4 minutes to something that he's seemingly changing his stance on, and that is Pakistan. Gurcharan Das, I'm going to start with you. He did have an outreach to the Kashmiri youth. He spoke about the unrest there, but he also seems to have changed his stance on Pakistan. He made very open overtures. He tried to build a rapport with Nawaz Sharif, and today he took them on. Not just Pakistan, mentioned Balochistan and all of that. Is there a tectonic shift in Prime Minister Modi's own stance towards our neighbors?
Yeah, I think this is a very refreshing stance. And the fact that he mentioned Balochistan, Gilgit, Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, these are real issues, and we have always tried to gloss over them as a country. and I think we need that assertiveness. We need to tell Pakistan where it gets off, and so it was good that this was not put in the context only of terrorism, but in the context of geopolitics. And I myself feel that this is something that India needed to remind Pakistan about.
Let's get to the man who has a lot of views on this, and Dileep Padgaonkar, I know you the last word as far as this leg of the debate is concerned. It's unprecedented, the kind of overtures he was making to Pakistan, and the change in stance at a platform like the Red Fort is also unprecedented. But do you believe he's learnt the hard way, and there is now a change in stance? The engagement has gone from being conciliatory and friendship and personal rapport to what he really said today.
Well, first and foremost, I quite welcome the Prime Minister's reference to POK, to Gilgit-Baltistan and to Balochistan. I think these things needed to be said again and again. You know, in 1994, there was a unanimous resolution of our parliament saying that the only thing that remains to be done as far as Kashmir is concerned is for POK to return to the Indian Union. But since then, successive governments have neglected what has been happening in the northern areas and in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. I am now delighted that for once we are paying attention to what's been happening in that part of the princely state which has been under the occupation of Pakistan. I am also glad that the Prime Minister has spoken about Balochistan, because there again Pakistan is making a to-do about human rights violations in Jammu and Kashmir. I think it's just as well that we now focus attention on what is happening in Balochistan, and I'm equally delighted that he chose the example of the brutal terrorist attack on a school in Peshawar to highlight this fact. I think it's going to be extremely difficult for Pakistan now to do the kind of things it's been doing as far as J&K is concerned, and Pakistan is bound to be on the defensive, because for once an Indian Prime Minister has shown the lucidity and the courage to call a spade, and I'm absolutely delighted by this development.
Indeed. Rajiv Chandrashekhar, I want to put this question to you because in Parliament, the Prime Minister has been accused of a flip-flop on Pakistan. Many issues were raised in the Rajya Sabha even this year, even this session. My question to you is, how do you see his shift in stance once again on Pakistan?
Of course, I think, of course, there's a shift in stance. I think there's a shift in stance for most of India, excepting probably the intellectual liberal left. I think the Prime Minister of India, any new Prime Minister of India, is obligated and obliged to try a peaceful path of reconciliation, which is what Prime Minister Modi did for the best part of the last 2 years. But we all know, for people who follow Pakistan, that it is that seedhi ungli se ghee nahi nikalne wali baat. You know, it is always Pakistan needs to be dealt with firm, clear, unambiguous terms, saying good behavior or else. And I think he's coming around to that. But I don't think this is a mistake as much as a natural evolution of a Prime Minister with a new mandate of first trying a peaceful, reconciliatory, personal approach to reconciling our differences, and failing which, doing what the national interest requires him to do, which is to protect India at all counts. And if the fight has to be taken at a diplomatic and other levels to Pakistan, so be it. So that is what we heard him saying today, openly and clearly.
I'm completely running out of time here, and so I'm going to go for a last round of rating this speech. Dr. Rajiv Kumar, I'm going to begin with you. You've been very candid and you've liked parts of his speeches. You would have wanted him to cover more ground on the others. If I were to ask you to rate this speech on a scale of 1 to 10, what would your number be?
Well, that's very difficult, but anyway, I would rate it above 8, and I think it is one of the better speeches. Let me just end up. Let me just also say just one last thing, which is that yes, calling spade a spade about Pakistan is all very good, and he's done it. He should have done it. But also, India is too great a country to get caught in any of these, tit for tats with Pakistan. We have to rise above it, and I'm sure this Prime Minister of ours, the statesman that he is, will soon enough rise above that and put Pakistan in its place, which is by ignoring it completely rather than getting caught in any Pakistan baiting or in any tit for tat. They're just too small for us. We don't need to get into that.
Right. Fair point indeed. Gurcharan Das, 8 or 10 coming from Dr. Rajiv Kumar. Are you going to be as generous?
Well, maybe around 7.5. And I've indicated to you where I thought the deficits were. And I thought that we need to sell reforms, and this is a forum to do it. And secondly, I do believe that there should have been a better scorecard on jobs in this rate. I mean, a lot of things he did say will help jobs, but that's what needed to be said. How it will be done,
Right.
That leap
right.
wasn't made,
right.
into mental leap.
Right. Dileep Padgaonkar, I'm going to ask you to, sir, really give me only a number there on a scale of 1 to 10. I'm out of time. I can't take an answer from Sunil, Kant, Munjal or Rajiv Chandrashekhar for that matter. But I do need you to give me a number there.
A little above 6%. It would have been great had he spoken about what he intends to do in J&K, how he's going to reach out to them. Had he done that, I would have come closer to 7. But in the absence of that particular remark on what he intends to do in Jammu and Kashmir, I'd still say it is anywhere between 6 and 6.5.
6 to 6.5, and I kind of agree with all of you on the points that you make. But this is a very, very historic address. This has seen the evolution of the Prime Minister from the headlines that he made in the first two to really getting down to implementation, touching upon all his constituents, talking about caste and religion and rising above all of that. Completely out of time on this edition of India at 70. Thank you very much, each one of you, for sparing time and joining us on this edition of this special show.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.